So we're now at the point where I'm going to extinguish the fireside chat, the fireplace behind me now. I'm going to turn that off, and we're going to go instead to a great round with three absolute experts when it comes to the Arctic. And I'm so pleased they were able to appear with us today. Two of the three, in fact, wrote papers that helped inform how we put together this report, and they're here to tell us if we got it right or not. And so I'd like to welcome the following three. Ambassador Carla Sands, I think you all will appear on the screen, as well as Katarzyna Zisk, who is coming to us from overseas, and then Rebecca Pincus, who is here as well. I'm going to tell you a little bit about these three, and thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed our little fireside chat. I do wish I had a fireside. I just think it kind of should go with the title. But Ambassador Carla Sands, she was the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands in the last administration. I'm so glad that to see the addition of Greenland and Faroe Islands to the title. Those are very important pieces of geography that I think you're going to tell us all about during this time. Katarzyna Zisk is a professor of international relations and contemporary history at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. She was an author of one of the papers, and I can tell you her institute has been very involved in Arctic and the high north issues. The Norwegian voice at NATO is very important to bring before the alliance the high north issues. Sometimes I think Norway felt they were all alone in talking about it, although Iceland certainly shares that. But you've got two new allies joining you, Sweden and Finland. So I predict the high north voice is going to become much louder in the alliance meetings. And then finally, Rebecca Pincus, who is a well-known name and well-known expert, director of the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center. I'm an adjunct senior fellow at the Wilson Center as well. I've enjoyed my relationship there, and you've taught me everything I know about the Arctic. So welcome to you as well, Rebecca. Why don't we, what I want to do is have each of the three panelists start off with just some quick comments based on what you just heard in the fireside chat, or after you've read what we wrote. You want to correct the record, that would be great too. But we're going to start with Ambassador Sands, who's got something to say about her experience as the ambassador to U.S. ambassador to Denmark, and particularly what she saw when she dealt with Greenland and particularly the Faroe Islands. So, Ambassador Sands, welcome. And why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Jim, and hello to everyone that's joining. So I was recently the ambassador to Denmark, and part of the kingdom is Greenland and the Faroe Islands. And when I was getting ready to go, I learned about the aggression, both economic and military aggression, by China and by Russia in the region. And so I made a goal. My number one goal when I was going through ambassador school was to open a consulate in Greenland. We hadn't had a diplomatic presence for 67 years. And when I went around to the White House, DOD, and the State Department, really there was no interest in increasing our presence in the high north. And I got a lot of no's. But I was at the National Science Foundation for a briefing when I saw a map of the Arctic on the wall. And I'm going to ask our presenters to put the map up for you so you can see it. So this map of the Arctic, the point of view is the actual North Pole. This is how the People's Republic military, so the Chinese military, looks at the Arctic, as does their country leadership. And you can see that from about 10 o'clock until about 3 or 4 o'clock is the Russian coast. That Russian coast is unlike any other coast in the Arctic. It's heavily militarized. They've reopened old Cold War bases. They've created new points of militarization. They have 40 icebreakers. Some have missiles. So this is the Russian coast. Now, if you drop down, the Russian border is with Finland around 3, 4 o'clock. Go to around 10 o'clock and 9 o'clock. That's the American state of Alaska. Then as you continue counterclockwise, that's Canada. And then dead at 6 o'clock, that giant landmass is the island of Greenland. It's 1/3 the size of the continental United States with about 55,000 inhabitants. And then off to the right there, a little speck is in the GIUK gap, are the Faroe Islands. So this is how I looked at the region, and our team did as well. And so I took that map, and I also took a book that I found while I was in Greenland. Can we show that book? It's just a book about the US military occupation of Greenland during World War II. And I went, thank you so much. I went to every, about half of our departments, took the map in the book to secretaries, assistant secretaries, deputy assistant secretaries, PDAS, and shared the concern I had about the region and how we were absent, and that vacuum that we were creating was being filled by China and Russia in different ways. And we actually were successful, and we can show the folks now our new consulate. We opened in June of 2020. This is the actual building today. It's a temporary building, but we're there. And so we have that presence to increase our cooperation. Thanks so much for showing those slides. So what we were able to do was reopen our consulate to create this diplomatic presence. We were able to work to get a Coast Guard billet based in Denmark for Arctic security, and achieve trade and cooperation agreements with both the Faroe Islands and with Greenland to increase resilience against malign interests from say Russia or China. And we were also able to renegotiate something called the Thule Air Base Maintenance Contract. We have an air base at the north of Greenland. It's our most northern base that the US has. And we had a dispute for about 5 years when I got there, and it was causing problems between the US and our ally, Denmark, but also Greenland. So we were able to renegotiate that to the satisfaction of the Danes and the Greenlanders, further strengthening our resilience in the region. So I encourage you to look at the Arctic as a whole as we talk about this, because we really do see Russia is a presence unlike any other, and we have to always keep that in mind. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for bringing those pictures. I'll have to say, you might not know this, but when I was the young Nordic desk officer, 1990, 1991, 1992, I helped lead the team to dismantle a lot of what we had up in Greenland for the Cold War. Radar sites along the south, the die sites, Kulusuk, Sonnerström Fjord, 2 bases we had there, and we left Thule up there, thank goodness. And so I'll have to say, those days are long behind us, and I'm really happy to see a U.S. footprint back there in Greenland and Faroe Islands too. I could talk a long time about that infrastructure up there. So I was really glad to see that, and I agree with you in terms of the need to make sure there's not a gap that's filled by others. But let's turn to Katarzyna Zisk. You know, coming out of Norway, as I mentioned, Norway has, while the U.S. might have dismantled in Greenland, and also we closed our base in Iceland, we closed some navigational facilities on the Faroe Islands. We stopped a lot of our work with Norway, frankly, and on anti-submarine warfare, things like that. While the U.S. and the West might have pulled in from a lot of what we did during the Cold War in the Arctic and in the high north, Norway did not. Norway continued the P3 flights. Norway has always had a correct relationship with Russia, and has had to deal with to continue to deal with the Northern Fleet area while almost alone, as the rest of the nations of NATO took a peace dividend and wasn't up there as much as we used to be. So Katarzyna, tell us more about what you're seeing out of Norway and what you think might be happening in the coming year or so in that Northern Fleet area as Russia has to deal not just with Ukraine, but the fact that Sweden and Finland will be joining NATO.
Right. Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks to CNAS, the whole team, Andrea in particular, for bringing attention to these important aspects of of the implications, the impact of the war, which has also spillover effects, it's been said already in the Arctic as well. And you're right, indeed, Norway has maintained its attention in different ways, including in an expertise. Russia studies has never been defunded compared to many other countries. So this is something we are continuing, and I also have been doing a lot of work over the past 15 years on the Arctic, including Russia in the Arctic. And I would like to highlight, maybe to start the discussion, two important aspects of the Russian approach in the Arctic. And first is the fact that, well, you have touched upon this in the previous panel, namely the question whether Russia's extensive material and personal losses in Ukraine, including hundreds of soldiers that were lost from the Arctic units, including the 200 motorized brigade, the Arctic Brigade from Pechenga, whether that would weaken Russia's military footprint in the Arctic, including in the European part of the Arctic, and whether Russia would deprioritize the region, especially as the economic situation continues to worsen and is likely to get even worse in the times ahead. So, and also because the region, as it's also been mentioned, still remains one of the most stable regions, most stable Russian borderlands. And I think this is a logical question, but however, Russia does not apply this logic, it seems. To date, there are no indications, in fact, that Russia will deprioritize the Arctic. It seems to stand strong in Moscow, as recently corroborated both at the doctrinal policy level and at the implementation level. For instance, the Russian maritime doctrine that was updated in July moved the Arctic to the top of the list of regional priorities. We also see that Russian military activity, surprisingly, given what's happening in Ukraine, is still quite intense in the region. In August, for instance, Russia conducted a large military exercise, which involved 10 surface vessels, the flagship of the Northern Fleet, Piotr Wielki. There were air and coastal defenses involved. So it seems that this is so important to Russia, this region, for a number of reasons we can discuss, that despite what this disaster, military and political and economic disaster, Russia still has an attention turned toward the Arctic. And the second point I would like to make is that the Russian coercive diplomacy and the use of force we have observed in the Russian policies over basically since 2008 in particular, has harmed Russia's economic and political ambitions in the Arctic. For instance, by limiting Russia's ability to expand its energy exploration offshore. In particular, Russia needs Western investments, Western technology, Western know-how, and they don't get that, especially since 2014, and it will get worse. And so it has also undermined the Russian ambition to turn the Northern Sea route into a major international transit route. This has been one of these great sort of poster projects for Russia in the Arctic. And one Russian entrepreneur aptly put it, the feeling among international shippers and traders right now is that everything that goes through Russia turns into acid, into poison. And finally, I would like to also add that the Russian ambition to solidify its position as the leading Arctic nation, this has been one of these major goals since 2000, expressed like this since 2008, has also been undermined by the Russian policies. It stands in contrast with the fact that Russia's current status is basically a pariah in various Arctic cooperation forums at the bilateral level, at the sub-regional and regional level, including the suspended cooperation in the Barents Euro-Arctic cooperation and in the Arctic Council. So where Russian military activity still stands strong, and especially the focus is in particular on the European Arctic, it seems Russia will likely emphasize the role of nuclear weapons to compensate for the growing asymmetry, capability gap in the conventional realm, especially compared to the United States and NATO. But the economic development will likely continue to be undermined by the direct and indirect consequences of Russia's policies, foreign policy. Thank you.
Well, that's quite a lot to talk about, and I think a lot of what you said, tracks with our findings as well in the report. So let me turn to Rebecca. I think we've heard quite a bit now, both from the ambassador and from Katarzyna, about Russia and what we're seeing up there. What's your take on it? What remarks would you want to make about both our report, your own work, as well as what we just heard?
Thanks, Jim. Great event so far, and one of the benefits about batting cleanup for such an outstanding panel is that, I'm going to agree with everything that's come before me, and I'll try to keep my remarks short so we can move to questions. I think that the report flags some really important drivers that I'm certainly watching. And one of those is decisions on the part of Chinese leadership about the extent to which they are interested in stepping into the funding gap that Katarzyna just mentioned. The extent to which the China-Russia partnership will evolve in coming months and years, I think, is critically important, and your report really underlines that. I think it's tremendously important. The future course of Russian leadership, I think we're all watching news out of Russia these days, not knowing what the future will hold. It's very unclear. This has been a remarkable 6 months and 7 months, and I think we still, as yet, have very little handle on what Russian politics will look like in months and years, and I think it'll be tremendously important. So anyone who tells you they know what the future holds for Russia in the Arctic, I have questions.
I agree.
And the last piece that I think I'll put in there, again, a couple quick thoughts here. The Arctic remains a really, really challenging region to operate in. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind. So whatever else is going on in the military and the economic domains, it is still operationally very challenging. And there are real questions about Northern Sea Route development on the operational basis. It's hard to navigate there. A major flotilla of ships got trapped in sea ice there last November for a couple of weeks. It's dark, it's cold, there's a lack of infrastructure. Economic trends are also making it really challenging for Russia to develop the NSR in addition to sanctions. And so I think we are at a point now where there's certainly a lot of interest in resources, but there's an enormous amount of flux happening. So I think we're fortunate in many ways to, as Greg Pollock mentioned at the top, right now the Arctic is free from conflict, and that is, we're very lucky for that because we have a lot of challenges to manage around the globe. And so I think we have some breathing space to carefully consider policy, diplomacy, and security in the Arctic while so much is in flux, and kind of focusing on the core elements. What are the core threat assessments up there? What are the key drivers? Sketching out those potential scenarios. I think the report does a really helpful job of surfacing those really important elements that will help us steer through a very uncertain future. And congratulations. It's a terrific report. Thanks. I was happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you for being a part of it. Your papers were very important. So let me ask the three of you a question, and then we're going to move to the audience. You heard from Doug that they're going to update the 2013 strategy. So there's a lot of work in the interagency on that, as well as the defense, updating the defense strategy on the Arctic. This is your opportunity to give one piece of advice to the administration as they are doing their work. And Rebecca, a lot of what you just said sounded a bit like some advice. So let me actually start with Ambassador Sands. If you were still in the government and in the interagency, and you knew that the NSC staff were honchoing this update to 2013 document, what is the one thing that you feel they really need to have in that strategy that is probably not there now? So what is it? Is it the Faroe Islands you want to point to? What is your advice to them?
Well, I think it is not siloing, and so that the interagency pulls together, but also that there's dialogue also with NATO, with EUCOM, with NORTHCOM, that all of the players, and you just don't get that, you reach out here and there, but to pull everyone together to strengthen our cooperation internally so that we can be more successful externally, because this is a really big challenge. It's something that maybe we were asleep at the switch for a long time, through perhaps decades. And so now we're reaping the consequences, but also making sure that it stays a low tension zone or area region when you have so much militarization. And then you have China's 2018 white paper that they wrote, the Polar Silk Road, where they have absolute intention of being involved in governance and benefiting economically from the Arctic, and even saying they're entitled, because they have 25% of the population of the world. They should have 25% of the Arctic. So we have to be very careful that the lines remain clear, and that we are united, I would say, NATO allies in the Arctic, to deter those who don't have our best interests at heart.
Very good advice. I like the not the stovepipe. I think that's excellent. And that's a problem always in writing these strategies. Katarzyna, let me ask you. You, of course, work in Norway. You're part of the institute there, but I'm going to put you into the interagency for a few minutes, and you get to sit around the table at the NSC and contribute to the discussions there. What's your one piece of advice that you need to that you want this administration to come away with for their strategy?
I think what is, with the observation over the past 15 years, we have had a discussion what Arctic issues belong to the sort of global Arctic, globally, fully, like regionally, should be treated from the global perspective, such as climate change. You cannot tackle it just in the Arctic region. There are some regional issues, and then there are sub-regional, even local issues. And I think understanding what belongs where is very important, because Arctic is a quite diverse region of many important, but also varying sub-regions. So, sorting out these issues correctly will be important. And at the sub-regional level, especially if I, looking from my European perspective, I think it is also important to understand that there is these regions, so the high north, the Baltic, the Black Sea region are much more connected. They're interconnected security spaces, and they should be treated like that. And right. I think the Finland and Sweden joining NATO will even reinforce that aspect, because these are Arctic countries, but they have a strong footprint, of course, in the Baltic Sea. Yeah,
I agree with that completely, and I hope that they have that perspective as they write this update. Well, Rebecca, it's now up to you. What's your piece of advice? I heard you say some things that sounded pretty good, but you're in the interagency now. You're sitting there in the OAOB, and NSC's running this meeting. What's your advice?
Great thought exercise. I think a lot about putting the Arctic in a global context, and I think, when we think about these big overarching documents like the National Security Strategy or the National Defense Strategy, we have to look around the world at the threat picture and the opportunity picture for the United States, and then kind of fit the Arctic in there. And so I think a lot about efficiencies, because what we know is that we're focused on China as the pacing challenge. And right now we have a second priority of, land war in Europe that we haven't seen in decades. That is very costly, and it's going to remain very costly into the future. Not only, the war effort, but the refugee effort, rebuilding Ukraine. And so we have a focus on the Indo-Pacific theater as the top priority, peer competition with China, which is a global competition involving all elements of US power. We have, land war in Europe, which is we're sending a lot of support, a lot of arms, a lot of money, and that will continue in the future. That means that there's not sort of resources and time and attention lying around looking for a use. We're in a strapped position from a sort of policy attention and a financial perspective, and so thinking about ways of advancing our work in the Arctic, it's got to be done with efficiency in mind. How can we sort of maximize effectiveness, as the ambassador said, work with our allies and partners, break down those stovepipes that create inefficiency. But the idea that we should that there's sort of a lot of time and resources to throw into the Arctic it's not true. We're strapped right now. So we have to have greater effects with probably, about the same amount of resources, I would think. And so that brings me to focusing on, find efficiencies. Don't go to the simple answer of, more. It's sort of more effect.
Boy, that's great advice. And it reminds me, I probably should have asked Greg earlier on his new office there in OSD policy. I'm sure that the people who do China and the Indo-Pacific and some of the other regions had the knives out saying, don't think you're going to come in with your Arctic office and take over. And so I'm sure that they're having to defend themselves bureaucratically all the time. But you're right. We are strapped. We're very thin. There's fights between the guys who do Europe and the folks who do Indo-Pacific over where U.S. forces should go. And now you throw the Arctic into this too. So it's tough. And so very, very good advice there. So we're going to go to the audience right now. There's a good question that has come in from, if I can find it now, from Breton, if I got your name right. And this is for Katarzyna. And the question is broadly, what new lines of cooperation do you think Norway intends to pursue on the Arctic in the NATO context, now that Finland and Sweden are joining the alliance? How will Norway's cooperation evolve with Sweden and Finland in the alliance? That's a great question. I'm wondering that myself. So this is about Norway. What are you going to pursue in the Arctic in the NATO context? And then also Sweden and Finland joining. How will that impact cooperation? That's with Norway, and also the cooperation within the alliance among the Nordic nations. So what do you think?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, because that was something that, even though there has been the cooperation within in the Nordic countries, the defense cooperation has been developing over the years. The problem always was the lack of Article 5, the formal solidarity commitment in case of a crisis of conflict. Mm-hmm. This is now gone, and I think this opens a number of possibilities, including cooperation on air defense in the region, logistics and supply, use of military bases in these various countries, joint exercises and training. I think intelligence exchange and situational awareness with regard to the Arctic will also be greatly enhanced by the fact. I think so that's sort of defense cooperation, but also it opens new possibilities for these countries to work on social resilience, social security, and all the addressing activities below the threshold. So I think in general, we are having this gap, security defense gap in the region closing up, and that will greatly strengthen, in my view, security of Norway and of the whole region.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think you laid it out really well, and I'm really looking forward over time to watch. I've worked with the Nordics for many years, and I'm looking forward to watching the dynamics with Sweden and Finland coming in. It's going to be, I'll be eating popcorn. That'll be that icon for me watching this happen. So it's going to be very interesting. So thank you for that. Some very good questions coming in from the audience. One is for Ambassador Sands, and I think this is a good question. It's from Adam. Ambassador Sands, is there a common understanding of how we differentiate between a malign Chinese interest on the one hand and investment from legitimate economic investments in the other? And I think that, I think Greenland had to wrestle with that. Are there some Chinese interests and investments that are legitimate and might make sense for a nation? Or are there not? Or we have to consider all Chinese interests as being malign? So is there, as the ambassador, how would you advise Greenland, say, to make that kind of decision about interest from China?
Well, thanks for the question. Here's the thing. If it's a Chinese state-owned enterprise, it is a malign investment. They're working actively to make investments, to make loans, do projects that ultimately many countries can't service the debt, and the Chinese take the asset. or something in exchange. We can look at Djibouti, we can look at Sri Lanka, Montenegro. There are so many examples around the world. If, for instance, one of the Chinese state-owned enterprises tried to build 3 airports in Greenland. Greenland has basically no infrastructure. There's not even a road between any of the towns. Nothing is connected except by air or by sea if the sea is passable, if it's open. So they tried to finance and build 3 airports. Well, thankfully, the Danish government stepped in and said, you know what, we'll finance those airports and we'll get this done. And China withdrew from bidding on the construction, because if it's the Chinese state-owned enterprise, this is China's way of gaining power in the world. And it's just another pearl in their necklace of control of trade routes. And with the trade routes comes military support. And so we have a global, it's not just about the Arctic, it's the entire globe, the US. We really can't take our eyes away from any region, because we have the ascendant China, and we have to counter them everywhere. I'll just give you the example of Antarctica. I mean, we're talking about the Arctic, but I mean, every region, and we do have constrained resources, as Rebecca mentioned. And so it's a challenge, but we still have to deter our greatest adversary, who is working every day by every means available. Economic is one of them. 80 million people every day wake up in China and work to defeat the United States.
Did you have an example with Antarctica? You mentioned that there was an example.
I'm just saying there's a big Chinese presence there. And when China says, well, we're going to do research, it's not just research. It comes with other activities. And I'm sure you ladies can talk about that. I mean, the military is there, and they attempt to attain supremacy. They want to be the global hegemon, and we'll all be vassal states. And we have to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, Katarzyna and Rebecca, the ambassador suggested that you all would probably have a view on that too. Katarzyna, do you have a view on China and the investments that they make, whether it's state-owned or however it might be? Katarzyna.
Yes, of course. I fully agree. This is in general, very problematic, given the fact that the differences in values, in the fact how China has actually been using that to its own advantage. The political pressure we've seen exercising by China in other countries where they've made all these investments. I think concern is that, well, to date, China has been actually behaving very responsibly in the Arctic, has not been trying to challenge. The problem is, of course, we see what China does in other regions. It is really hard to ignore it. And the fact that my concern is, as China continues to make the investments, for now, in particular in the Russian Arctic, that this at some point may be followed also by growing political ambitions, maybe also some security or even military presence to provide safety for these different operations of China in the region. And that may, of course, lead to frictions and increased tension in the region, because, of course, the Arctic is just one of the platforms where we also see the US-Chinese rivalry growing. So that I would add this to the discussion.
If I could just speak to that for 1 second.
Sure.
So I will just say I disagree with you, because in the Faroe Islands, Huawei wanted to be the 5G provider. And I wrote an op-ed cautioning the Faroe Islands, the people of the Faroe Islands leadership, not a good idea, because it doesn't have a back door, it has a front door. And it's not a good carrier to use, because it's a state-owned enterprise, more or less. And a way of spying and controlling. And the Chinese ambassador went and threatened the premier. You're not going to get a trade deal if you don't use Huawei in your 5G. And it plugs into Scotland. So it's a part of that GI-UK area. And, that threat is absolutely how China plays. They own a minority interest in a majority of the mines, even in Greenland. So there is absolutely not always good citizen behavior from China in the Arctic.
So may I don't think we disagree. I was exactly what I was trying to say. So maybe I have expressed myself not very clearly.
No,
So yes, I do
I think
agree.
I think Katarzyna was saying that in the past,
Oh, okay.
China but as we see their actions across the world, you can't assume that they're not doing the same thing in the Arctic. And I think your example is an important and a good one. I'm glad you did that op-ed. I'm sure that was the first time an op-ed had been put into the Faroese Gazette. Let me ask Rebecca, you want to add anything to that, and then we're going to go back to the audience.
Excellent points all around. I think, we're fortunate in the Arctic region to be working with a strong network of, very strong, capable democratic allies, as Greg noted earlier, Greg Pollock, and also Des Jones noted that. And I think in the last few years, we've seen a tremendous amount of attention paid to the sort of potential strings attached to Chinese investment. And I think scrutiny of those investments has increased significantly. And so in the last couple of years, we've really seen some potentially problematic investments blocked. And so I think the level of awareness is much greater. And I think in many ways, that's a success story that we can be very happy about. I think really right now, the question when it comes to Chinese investment in the Arctic is really focused on Russia. And that's something where we obviously have very little leverage and, need to be very careful about the ways in which Chinese investment in Russia would increase Chinese leverage over the Russian Arctic in ways that are adverse to the United States interest. Following the 2015 round of sanctions, we saw a pretty deliberate turn on the part of Russia towards Chinese capital. And that's, I would argue that's bad for the United States. So obviously that's something that the second order effects we need to be very attentive to. So far, we've seen that the major Chinese enterprises have been largely complying with sanctions. They're avoiding those secondary sanctions. But that's a major leverage point. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch the extent to which Chinese investment continues to flow into the Russian Arctic or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. So we're going to have two more questions. We're just about at the bewitching time. And the first one is going to come from our friends in the audience. And I have to find it again. There it is, from Brendan. And this is also a question that would have been good for the fireside chat. And that was, do we see an expansion of U.S. military presence in the Arctic, either with new facilities or basing agreements with Arctic allies? Very interesting. Do we see an expansion of U.S. military presence in the Arctic, either with new facilities or basing agreements with Arctic allies? And I think what I want to start is with Katarzyna, because Norway, we've got a lot of U.S. military now going back and forth through Norway, particularly the Marines. And so with the Navy, with P-8s, working with yours, F-35s, the Air Force, there's a lot that can happen up in Norway. So how would you answer that question?
I would say briefly yes, and it also depends what kind of period of time we are talking about, because that presence has been increasing gradually. It's also in the context of NATO cooperation. We've seen, the military exercises have been larger. Trident Juncture was, I think, 50,000 soldiers. We see, for instance, U.S. has periodically deployed strategic capabilities such as aircraft carriers. For instance, during the NATO Trident Juncture exercise, which was operating close to the Arctic Circle for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union. It was in 2018. And yes, the presence of the U.S. Marines has been increasing. There have been different arrangements, but in general, there is a stronger footprint. Also, the surface naval presence, the submarines, U.S. submarines and Air Force have continued patrols in the Arctic over the years. But again, we've seen more surface naval presence in the region. As you mentioned, also, the U.S. has been using the facilities, allied facilities existing already in the region. And I think it's a great idea. It saves money, but also, in a way, it's not unnecessarily, expanding. Maybe we will have expansion of infrastructure, but to date, it has not been necessary. And I think it's a great idea. For instance, the US bombers, Lancers, they have been landing on Norwegian air bases. So in general, we see that both NATO and the US footprint in the region is stronger, and this is a response to Russia's policies in the region in general, but also on the broader international stage. So we also had, of course, the reestablishment of the Second Fleet and the US-based Atlantic Command in Norfolk. So I'm talking basically about the last, let's say, 5 years. We've seen that definitely growing up.
Yep, no, absolutely. In fact, when I left the Pentagon in 2017, the last thing I did was to go through Iceland and Norway and to exactly talk about and get those things going. But Rebecca, you, and then off to the ambassador. Rebecca, what do you think?
I'll make it really quick. We can't forget about Alaska.
I was going to say, yeah.
Alaska hosts the largest concentration of F-35s in the world, and we now have a reactivated 11th Airborne Division. So the U.S. Army has a massive presence in Alaska as well. Enormous U.S. Coast Guard presence, and Navy is becoming more and more active and has some installations in Alaska. And so we cannot forget that we have, a very formidable outpost in the United States Arctic. We also work incredibly closely with our Canadian allies through NORAD Northcom. We're all focused on NORAD modernizations, which will be improving the over-horizon radar capabilities. And so I think we can't forget about the North American Arctic. It is in the process of getting some really formidable and modern capabilities.
Absolutely right.
That's why we both are here, Becca.
Yeah.
Both are on the panel.
Absolutely. Ambassador.
Yeah, really briefly, I think that we are seeing that we at U.S. military needs to be more nimble, that the threats pop up here and there. And we saw such a big footprint in the Middle East, and we got so mired in that region for so long. And we can see that, we have to have a more global perspective, I think. And as we redistribute resources, I do agree it's so much more efficient to be able to go where we're needed. And the Alaska cooperation in the Arctic with the native populations and bringing up, I would say, capabilities also makes these both Canada and Denmark more resilient to malign influence. I mean, when the PRC flew the Greenlandic premier and their government over, rolled out the red carpet, 30 C-suite guys offering, what can we do? I mean, that's how this happens. And so I think nimble and a light footprint, like Katerina was talking about, is excellent.
So we have one question left. It's a very good one. It's a quick one for a lightning round. This is going to be a one-word answer. And the question is, if I can find it again, it's from David, rolling back in. The question is, what Arctic scenario keeps the panelists up at night? So give me one Arctic scenario. If you use one word, that would be even better. What keeps you up at night? Rebecca.
A nuclear accident. Russia has sunken nuclear reactors in the Kara Sea that are rusting rapidly. Terrifying.
Katarzyna.
Two. We give two. Escalation. So basically, Russian, what Russia has exercised over the past more than a decade, scenarios when a local confrontation basically reaches the regional level involving NATO and the United States. And that's where the Arctic, of course, the bastion defense in the region would be rolled out. Another one, search and rescue, disaster relief, and human assistance in the Arctic. All kinds of scenarios, including oil spill, cruise ship going aground, and that also would be probably quite disastrous in the region.
Ambassador.
So two, like Katerina, number one would be an escalation where there's an accident and it's provocative and then it escalates, which would be terrible. But to your point about the cruise ship, when we saw Trident Juncture, we had real ships that couldn't actually operate, and things happened. It was hard to get the seamen off the vessel. If that actually, you know what? I think it was actually a cruise ship off the coast of Norway, and it was hard to get the people off. It wasn't Trident Juncture. It was a private cruise. If it was so hard to get people off this cruise ship just off the coast of a rich which Norwegian coast. What's going to happen if we have a cruise ship disaster that's exploring one of these, remote areas where there are no resources and there is really no capable search and rescue? So I agree with you 100%.
Thank you all so much. We are out of time. Those scenarios keep me up at night as well. Let's hope that we can resolve some of those so we can get a good night's sleep. But to the panelists, thank you so much for taking time out of your personal schedules. And I'm so impressed with everyone. Just the knowledge coming out heartens me. So thank you all so much. And I hope our paths will cross again. And I'd like to thank all of our audience as well, and the great questions that came our way. Just excellent. I think 10 years ago, we would not have seen this kind of interest in these kinds of questions and this expertise, but we're seeing it now, and we will see it in the future, and you all will be the leaders of that. So thank you so much. Please, everyone, check into the CNAS website, look for the Russia in the Arctic piece, and send us your cards and letters with any comments you may have. So thank you all so much, and have a good afternoon.